Okay, so we're going to try and do a quicker overview, and this still says 125. How much time am I supposed to have?
Well, what if you should take a half an hour?
Half an hour, okay. I'm going to use the...
Will that work?
It'll be rushed, but we'll do it. Yeah, we'll do it. No, it's all right. This, when I'm in presentation mode, doesn't give me the clock. That's why I... Anyway, okay, so we're talking about raising a new generation, and we're going to... this will be a very quick overview, but stop and ask yourself, what are you going to do with yourself for the next 10 years? If you're under 30, you're probably trying to make sense of life. You're trying to figure out your place in life. And you may not have all the skills you need, you may not have all the emotional maturity you need, and in today's world, developing takes a lot longer than it used to. Time was when you got out of high school and got married at 18 and everybody kind of figured you were off to the races. But as we all know, we now have children that come home from university at age 22 or 25 or 28, and they move back in with mom and dad, and we have people who are still trying to find themselves in their 30s. So it depends on where you are in the emotional development curve. A lot of you are older than that, but not all of you are. And this is important not only even if you're above that age bracket, because you're going to be working with younger leaders who are in that age bracket. So you have to understand a bit about where they are. If you're in your later 30s or your 40s, you're probably busy raising a family and developing expertise in a skill that will become a career, and if it's a ministry, well, then that's your career, but it still requires certain skills that may not come natively and intuitively to you. And if you're above your 40s, so your 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s, if you're in that age bracket, you probably have your most productive years ahead of you, and you're actually trying to figure out how to grow new leaders. You're trying to figure out how to sum up everything you've learned and transmit it into the next generation. If you were in a corporation and not ministry, you'd be viewed as a senior leader. And I would just say this, from my years in corporate America, if you were a C-level executive, or for that matter, even a little below that, and you aren't developing your own replacement, you can't literally say, this is the person who will take my job when I'm gone. You yourself will likely be replaced. That's how it is in corporate America. So the need to replicate yourself is critical. In corporate America, they would say you have failed as a leader if you haven't reproduced yourself. Well, one of the dominant themes of our day is the need for fatherhood. It's coming through in a lot of the theologizing that we're hearing, all the language of sons and daughters, and there's nothing wrong with it per se, but I will say this, that need for fathering, and to a lesser degree, but not zero for sure, for mothering, it comes through with different faces. In the world, meaning the non-Christian life out there, it tends to manifest as anger and rebellion and an unwillingness to follow the older generation. And so everything is questioned, and in a way, nowadays looks like a replay of the 1960s, which was the first truly fatherless generation, partially because a lot of people had been killed in the war, and partially because even those who weren't, divorce was happening, and so many children were being raised in homes where dad was gone, and mom was probably sleeping around, which creates its own problems as well. So in the church, the lack of fatherhood can look a lot like the world, but if people are being socialized as Christians, instead the face of it tends to be less angry and rebellious, not zero, but less angry and rebellious, and more like kind of a persistent hesitancy or an uncertainty about who they are, what they want out of life, and where they're going. So raising leaders in an environment like this, and we're talking about church leaders, it doesn't happen accidentally, just as raising children does not happen accidentally. And great leaders are built through intentionality. And the challenge I'd want to throw out to the whole room, and I would put myself on the list, is do you have a protege? Or better yet, maybe 2 or 3 of them that you are intentionally raising. Now this cannot be farmed out. You can hire a caregiver for your children for when you're at school, but you and only you can form their values, the way they will respond to crisis, whether they have an optimistic or a pessimistic view of the world, and on and on and on. And this is equally true in the realm of the spirit, and I dare say that there are a lot of people that are looking for people to raise their spiritual children. Some years ago, John Wimber came out here to Australia, and he had done a lot of conferences, and John, you were involved in all that in those years. And there was a meeting that was held in which a bunch of people who wanted to become vineyard churches showed up at that meeting. Were you present for that?
I was leading.
You were leading. Okay. You were there.
It wasn't pretty.
No, I was about to say, it wasn't pretty. Because in the meeting, one of the Australians, in a very Australian way, as only an Australian can do, I may have the language slightly off, but it was pretty close to, so what we want to know is, are you going to come out here and father the bastard children you sired all over this country? Or are you going to turn us loose? Is that pretty close to, it's a sentiment if it's not the word. Elaine's nodding. And one of the other things that goes on is we have the desire to look outside of our own sphere for leaders that we can bring in from the outside who are already what we think they should be, and thereby shortcut the process of raising and taking care of those that are sent to us as young leaders. Now, in the short term, it might be easier to hire people who meet those requirements. But in the long run, we do a disservice both to the congregations we serve, because we're not actually raising the next generation of leaders, but we also do a disservice to those people around us, those hungry people who would like to be our proteges and are looking for someone to help them, him or her, achieve their full potential in life. And so it has the additional effect, long term, of progressively narrowing the base of church leadership. So that in the end, the church is not only smaller numerically, it's more parochial in every sense of the word, and disconnected from the outside world. So we have a broken leadership model, and one of the best symptoms of that I can point to is, and I mentioned this in session 1, is the increasing amount of online DVDs and web training. And you know, all of this is like trying to learn to dance or parachute or play a musical instrument without a coach. I mean, you can do a certain amount of that, but you know, somebody who's going to be a great ice skater or a track and field person, or they're going to learn to play guitar or piano, usually it's a mentorship process. They have to have somebody come alongside them who's better and who teaches them all that they know and says, you know, that you did right there, you need to change that. Your technique's a little wrong with the way you're holding your hands. And as everyone knows, younger people will resent that, but those who are getting a little older and wiser and are really seeking excellence and competence, they'll actually welcome that kind of input. So you will go through these cycles of where people arc up, and on the other hand, they embrace it. So being in relationship with a live personal mentor versus studying with one from afar, even if that person is a well-known big name, is probably the single most significant way a protege can grow at the speed they should be growing and to the depth that they should be growing. And I dare say, probably for many of us in this room, we've never achieved any of our potential as we should have, because we ourselves did not have mentors when we were in that time in life. It's just a sad fact. I mean, and we can't change it now. But we just need to acknowledge it and determine that we will not recapitulate the same sin that went before, as we saw in the book of Judges. So the additional effect of that is that these people who would be proteges, they remain frustrated at their lack of ability, their lack of finesse, at what they long to be great at, and at what they learn to accomplish as they move into leadership. And so, in the end, we breed another level of dissatisfaction and resentment. So the quest to change church culture comes to those in their 50s, 60s, and 70s, and hopefully they're by now, at that point, masters of their trade, whether by hook or by crook. But they seek to become coaches and mentors to those around them who would be their aspiring protégés. Now, being a leader in ministry it's a unique calling. There's nothing else in the world like it. Good, bad, and ugly. It requires character and it requires life skills. You know, people in the world may have exceptional life skills, but they may not have character. Or they may have character, maybe, not usually, but it could happen. The quintessential moral pagan. And maybe their life skills are somehow deficient because even though they're a moral pagan, they never had anybody really show them the ropes in life. It requires intentionality, but it also requires accountability. That means you have a plan in mind, but you're accountable to the plan and you're willing to give account for what you're doing. It requires creativity, the ability to hear from God and to come up with new ideas on your own, but it also requires execution. And I would say this, church leaders are notoriously poor at execution because they tend to be loving high F types on the Myers-Briggs scale, but they're not so high T. It requires imagination and grounding. It requires innocence and shrewdness, which Jesus characterized as innocent as a dove, but as shrewd as a serpent. It requires humility, but it also requires confidence. You know you can't do anything of your own, but you also know that God will do everything through you if you are faithful to Him. And I spoke to that in a slightly different way earlier. It requires brokenness and wholeness. Now, brokenness is not a term that we think of favorably in today's world, but brokenness is really that brokenness before God, where you realize that, you really are a wreck and you're lucky to be in the kingdom. And at the same time you say, but I'm a son, I'm a daughter, and I'm accepted in the beloved, and you have come to a place of healing where you are confident in your own skin. Well, all of these things, and as I say, all of them are juxtaposed to one another. And most of this stuff, one side or the other of the ledger, would be seen in a corporate environment or a political environment or a military environment or an educational environment, but not the other one. Humility is not something that's prized in politics, or in big business, or in the military. And so you can see that there's this tension that we live with, where on the one hand we have to be everything the world is, and on the other hand we have to be everything that the kingdom is. And so that's tough. Okay, now the watch has stopped altogether, so I have no idea where I am in my runtime. At least we've answered the question, the battery's dead. Halfway through, okay. All right.
What do you give you the signs?
Yeah, probably, yeah.
5.
Yeah. There we go, that'll help. Now yours will stop. Okay. All right, got it. So these things are built into individuals through personal, customized development. We can call it mentoring or coaching, but the point is it's symbiotic between the mentor and the protege, and that's why I said, what are you doing for the next 10 years? Because in asking the question, I've already answered the question. You should be finding people that you are going to coach and mentor and raise, hopefully to an even higher level of competence than you have. Now, as I said, some are seeking it through online experiences with influential but distant church figures that they'd like to emulate, but they have no relational connection. And so, therefore, of necessity, what they learn will be of some benefit, but they won't have anybody looking over their shoulder to say, I know you embrace that value, but you don't execute it very well. And so most people, the way they go after this is they go after formal education. And while formal education has its place and can't be really substituted for anything else, here's a disturbing statistic. Research tells us that the majority of seminary graduates do not gain the necessary hands-on experience that's necessary to succeed in ministry outside of classroom doors. And that's why we have so many seminary grads that come out that are like policy wonks. They're talking heads. 90% of pastors, 90% of pastors, 9 out of 10 say that they were inadequately trained for pastoral ministry, and over half feel incapable of meeting the needs in their current job of ministry. That's a terrifying statistic. Doctors, dentists, lawyers, psychologists, counselors, and teachers, all of these are required to be trained through a mix of formal education and hands-on experiences that bring them to professional competency. So whether it's a residency or a clinic or working as a, some sort of a law clerk or something, but they learn by doing. And that is true in ministry as well. Yes, you can get the formal education and there's value in that. The best would be to mix formal education with hands-on. But again, we're back to somebody needs to take accountability and responsibility for these younger ones. I can't really say young ones, but younger ones that are coming up. So we're building kingdom culture. Now, strong organizations have strong cultures. Strong cultures define what an organization is and is not. They define, if you will, as we used to say in one of my older companies, how we do business around here. What's acceptable, what's not acceptable. And culture in an organization, in this case a church, as opposed to its physical assets, the buildings, the car park, the, whatever. The culture is the one thing that is not easily reproduced from organization to organization. It is the one sustainable competitive advantage. I was having lunch with Bill Johnson a little while back, last year, and we were talking about him and Bethel and what they're doing, and he said, we have people come to us every week and we let them sit in on our staff meetings. And every one of them that comes to us says pretty much the same thing. We love you, we're with you, we are Bethel. And so we let them sit in on our staff meetings, and after the staff meeting is over, pretty much the same thing happens every time. Those same people who came and said, we are Bethel, they come to me and they say, Bill, after sitting in your staff meeting, I realize we are not Bethel. And I need to go away for 3 to 5 years and work on my congregation. Maybe then I can come back to you and try this again. See you later. Now, what is that? That is the sustainable competitive advantage that we call culture, that we have to build. So if we're going to build kingdom culture and it has this mentorship aspect to it, we have to take a moment to reflect on our own lives, really. So here's a question I'm just going to throw into the room. You don't need to answer it aloud, but answer it to yourself. If you could tell a younger, less experienced person what you would do differently in your life, what would you say? What would be the thing you would point to? And now break it down into intervals. What would you say you would have done differently 3 years ago so that where you are now will be different? And a bit different in a better way, presumably. 5 years ago. 10 years ago. If you're old enough, 20 years ago. Think about those things, because those are the kinds of life experiences that you want to impart. Sure, you could do it in a sermon, you could talk about it, but it's not the same as saying, Billy, when I was in the time of life that you're in, I had a situation a lot like what you went through, and here's how I decided, and here's why I wish I'd done differently. And nothing can substitute for that. So some of these should-haves are rooted in regret because we knew better, while others of them were due to naivete or lack of experience or a deficit of wise and godly counselors. So young leaders are always long on vision, long on passion, and long on raw talent, but they're often short on the personal development that they need in order to become what they need to be to succeed in the right way for the long haul. We're trying to build leaders for the long haul. We're trying to build something that will have vibrancy and consistency 2 generations, 3 generations from now.
That's right.
That means we're building for 100 years from now if Jesus tarries. More experienced leaders, on the other hand, may be competent, but they often don't intentionally execute the necessary steps of teaching, equipping, and guiding those who will follow them. So mentoring is more than information transfer. It's holistic, customized, and nuanced. I could say a lot more about that, but I'll just leave it at that. Holistic, whole life, customized to the individual. The way I mentor this person doesn't look like the way I mentor that person, and it's nuanced. It pays attention to the fine detail. And being a protege means laying aside the mistaken belief that previous generations don't have anything to tell you or don't understand the new world in which you live. That means you have to have enough humility to be mentor. And there are 4 recurrent themes that we try to bring up again and again as we raise people to their level of expertise. 4 recurrent themes. These are timeless threats that every spiritual leader will face. There are no exceptions to this. None. Number 1, you will face burnout. And if you're a spiritual leader now, you know this. So we have to teach those that are our proteges not to make the mistakes that lead to burnout. There's a whole bunch I could say about that, but we won't because I'm down to 10 minutes. Number 2, moral failure. Should go without saying, but it's right there. And moral is more than sexual. It includes money matters. It includes the matter of arrogating to ourselves glory that goes only to God. But moral failure is a perennial problem, and it's occurred throughout the ages of the church. Number 3, irrelevance to the surrounding culture. All you need to do is think about an old order Brethren church or an old order Mennonite church, and you would know exactly what I'm talking about. But I dare say there are some newer movements that have made the same kinds of mistakes, and they have gone obsolete and are no longer on the coal face. They're no longer on the cutting edge. Now, know that being gray of hair does not mean that you need to be obsolete. I mean, Bill Johnson is one of the most hip-witted people I know of, and he's got plenty of gray hair. Randy Clark is slightly less hip and with it, but not much. And Randy's older than Bill. And I look at Georgian Banoff, if you really want to get up there. Georgian is 75 years old. He'll get up and jump around on the stage, and he looks fit and thin, and he's got the bouffant hairdo, and he plays his violin, and Georgian's 75 years old, but he could be a 25-year-old youth leader. So age is not the metric here. And the 4th major threat is division. Division within those groups that we lead. Might be a congregation, could be a youth ministry, might be a parachurch organization, but division will wear a leader out and take that leader down. So kingdom culture is established first in its leaders. Now, because of time, I was going to read out of John 13, but we'll just pass over it. Jesus said, after he'd washed the disciples' feet, that he had set them an example and that they should follow the example he had set. He said, I, your Lord and Master, have done this. You ought to do likewise. So Jesus didn't just build or establish a kingdom culture. He lived it out first in front of them where they could see it. So the first place kingdom culture begins is in us. And as I've kind of consistently been saying, we hold ourselves accountable. And I might add, we allow our peers to hold us accountable to that kingdom culture ethic that we have set. And we might not always do so well, because here's the reality of anything in life that has any competency to it. There are 5 stages as we grow into expertise. The first stage is we are unaware and ignorant. We don't even know there's a there. We just are kind of floating along like a cornflake in the milk bowl of life. And suddenly something happens that we become aware that we need to do something. The second stage is where we are unconsciously incompetent. Meaning, we don't even know how bad we are, but we at least are trying to do something with what we previously didn't even know existed. But we're unconsciously incompetent. We are absolutely incompetent at it. And we don't know how bad we are. That's why it's unconscious. Later, we become consciously incompetent. We're still incompetent, but at least we can say, I'm starting to have a sense of how bad I am and how badly I need coaching and need to grow. The 4th stage is when we become consciously competent. We can do it right, but we have to focus on it. We have to try. Think of somebody who has an anger problem. They know to keep their anger under control. And so they do. They don't explode anymore. But the last stage is when we become unconsciously competent. That's the person who, they don't have an anger problem anymore because they're a person of peace and gentleness and joy. Does that make sense? So we have to take people through that range of experiences as it pertains to a whole area, a whole range of areas. And there are 5 areas of personal growth that we have to focus on when we raise leaders. 5 areas we have to focus on when we raise leaders. You've got a younger leader you're working on, all 5 of these will be in play. One may be more predominant for sure, or 2, but you've got to focus on all of them. Number 1, character and spiritual depth. Number 2, relational leadership. Number 3, missional formation. Number 4, transformative communication. And number 5, entrepreneurial leadership. Number 1, character and spiritual depth. Number 2, relational leadership. Number 3, missional formation. Number 4, transformative communication. And number 5, entrepreneurial leadership. Okay, so when we're dealing with character, there's 4 fatal flaws. Most young proteges will have 1 or more of these in play. You have to become a diagnostician and learn to work that out of their life. Now, character, as I'm defining it, is doing the right thing because it is the right thing, even when we would prefer to do something different, even when nobody is watching. That's what character is. I dare say a lot of this is being overlooked in a lot of our newer churches because we're trying to mass-produce disciples. You can't mass-produce disciples. They have to be custom-built. I already said that part. So here's the thing, and it's a tricky one. Character is not required to be effective. There are plenty of people who are effective who have very low character. They're Machiavellian, they're narcissistic, they're abusive. Character is required to be a leader worth following. Because if you are a person of character, people will want to follow you because you have moral authority. And by that I don't mean that you're not sleeping around. I mean that you have moral authority because what you say and do has credibility. So here are the big 4 fatal flaws. Imitation, which is the sin of envy. The diagnostic for envy is people act weak, needy, insecure, and dissatisfied. They long to be like somebody other than themselves. The antidote for it is originality, being who they are and comfortable in their own skin, and celebration of others and their victories. Now that could be a whole talk, but it's not going to be. That's all I'm going to say about it because I'm playing beat the clock. Number 2, performance, which is the sin of self-reliance. The diagnostic is they are addicted to productivity. How much can they produce? Self-determinism and creating their own destiny. You know these people because they're trying to build their ministry. The antidote is to become a farmer. You might say, what? A farmer? I thought we were talking about ministry. I'm using farmer as a metaphor. All farmers do is they create a context where good growth can occur. So they need to let go and let the crop grow as it will due to the sun and the rain. And that comes because they're grounded in identity and dependence. John 15, living. I am the vine, you are the branches. Again, there's a lot we could say about how you implement that, but that's where we have to go with those people. The third major flaw is overconfidence. This is the sin of foolishness in the sense of the book of Proverbs using it. The fool says in his heart, there is no God. And the diagnostic is they think more highly of themselves than they ought. You know these people because you look at them and they are just so overconfident. You just think they're going to crash and burn. This is not going to end well. It's going to be ugly when they hit the wall. And they do. And so the antidote is for them to collect wisdom, to seek feedback from their peers and superiors and subordinates, 360 feedback, and to consciously move away from trusting in their own good motives and intentions, eschewing instruction, despising instruction, being quick-tempered, or scoffing, or ignoring, or overlooking sin. Now I'm giving you a lot, and each one should be unpacked, but I'm just giving you kind of the way we go about it. And the last major shortcoming is the sin of entitlement, which is really rooted in the ancient sin of greed. Because it's all about consuming, gathering, and taking, whether physically, emotionally, or spiritually. Always seeking to climb, always seeking to be better, always seeking to compete, always seeking to have more. It'll cause people to make moral compromises with money. It'll cause people to make moral compromises with sex. It'll cause people to make moral compromises with the way they handle ministry. I'm thinking of a guy I know, don't really have time for this story, but I'll just tell it quickly. Think of a guy I know who's a pastor over in Melbourne, and he hired somebody who had this going on in his life, and within 2 months he'd left for another church because it was going to pay him, I think it was $2,000 more a year. But it had a better title, seemed more lofty. So that's the sin of greed. And you will see these things recurrently over and over. John, you've been in the ministry 42 years. Have you seen these 4 things played out again and again? So the antidote for this one is contentment, doing things that are right in secret, giving in secret, random acts of kindness that go unnoticed and unrewarded, and giving, whether relationally, financially, or time-wise. All right, let's talk about the other shortfalls quickly. I'm out of time, but I'll just knock these out so you have them to think about. I'm giving you the bare bones of things you can think about for your own ministries. Relational growth. There are 3 common tensions. Commitment and conflict and attachment. Those are your big 3. In the commitment field, there's going to be overcommitment and under-delivering. These are people who say too much and do too little. Well, you probably have these people, and the antidotes for those are teach them to set limits on things, set priorities, and keep margin in their life. One of the best things you can do with a young protege is require them to have at least a half day a week where there's nothing structured in their life. They can read a book, they can pray, they can just think about the week, but they have margin, they have something with which to play. Under-delivering, over-promising and then under-delivering, it may rally emotional energy, but in the end the failure to follow through is really a lack of integrity. So we need to tag this in people because of this integrity issue. And we have to move people around to where they begin over-delivering and under-promising. Conflict. Well, there's two areas here. One is avoidance and one is evoking it. Some people avoid conflict at any cost. They won't deliver the hard news in a gracious way, but they won't deliver the hard news. And it fosters relational dishonesty. It fosters relational cowardice. And dishonesty is a form of lying. And so we need to help people identify that this is not okay either, and lying is something that will rapidly undermine ministry. So the antidote is to own your emotions and say what needs to be heard, but to say it in a gracious manner. Conflict, on the other hand, some people evoke it. Well, here's a pithy aphorism. Conflict is inevitable, but combat is optional. So, there will be conflict in ministry. You're going to rub up against people. They're not always going to like what you say or do. Sometimes you'll be wrong, sometimes they're wrong, but you can choose to decline combat at any time. Which means, among other things, you bridle your tongue, and you bridle your emotions. No explosive outbursts, no tongue lashings, that sort of thing. So the antidotes that we try to encourage in people are that they listen more and speak more slowly. They choose not to be offended. They share power and control, and they make a choice to be less tough-minded and forthright. If people are constantly getting feedback that they're tough-minded and forthright, this means there's a problem in their relational conflict management. They're actually evoking conflict rather than avoiding it. Does that make sense? I'm giving you a list here. And then some people, they have a problem with over-attachment. They can't keep up with everyone's demands. They need to feel needed. They get hurt easily. They forgive too quickly. Now, we should forgive, but they don't make the relationship right, so they're really not actually making it a proper forgiveness. Detachment struggles with long-term commitment and vulnerability. These are the people that you can't seem to get to connect to anything. We need to call that out in their lives and say, I think you have a problem here, and it's going to hinder you in all that you're doing with your ministry. All right, in communication, we want people to communicate well. This means both from a pulpit or in a public speaking forum, but it also means in how they handle other people. Are their words barbed or are they gracious? Gentleness is a fruit of the Spirit. Have they learned how to speak to people honorably and nobly? Do they know how to speak to people in a lower position and still be in respect with respect to that person? part of communication, and there's a lot more we can say there too. And they need to communicate with an outward focus, which means they're not always talking about themselves. People who are always talking about them and their ministry and what they've done lately and all the great things they're doing, those people are emotionally unhealthy. And I'm thinking of somebody that I knew in some years gone by, and everybody I knew used to comment about this person, both about how spiritually anointed and gifted they were, and how you could never have an honest heads-up conversation with them, because literally you would sit down and this individual would start talking about themselves. The 48 most recent healings, the big deal that they were working on the side in their personal business, and this and that, but it was always about them, and they'd get to the end of a 3-hour meeting and they'd say, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't ask you about you at all. How are you doing?" And inevitably, as soon as they would ask that, if you'd answer the question, they'd turn it around and use it as a springboard to start talking about themselves again. Now that's a pretty extreme example, but I tell it because there are so many people in our culture who have been taught it's all about me. And the essence of Christian maturity is to be otherly. It's not all about you. You get to be a servant. We heard that this morning when we were doing the laying on of hands up here. And so we have to train younger people in this. And again, if we see it in them, call it out. Now, that requires of us, of course, that we can do it in a gracious manner. But this is what the job of being a mentor or a coach is. Mission. They need to have gospel momentum. They need to understand that pushing the gospel out of the walls of the church is not optional. And they need to do it in the spirit of the gospel. They need to understand God's heart for the world. There's so much more I could be saying about this, but anyway, they need to do it in the spirit of the gospel. That God wills to seek and to save the lost, and He will go to the last, least, and the worst. They know how to have gospel conversations, and they know how to do so in the power of the Spirit. They are learning to become soul winners. You know, John Wesley would not ordain anyone to the ministry who had not started 10 of these, what they called these home groups. They had a special name for it. But the circuit rider would go around and visit these groups. That was his congregation. In those days, it was all men. And with it, they know how to form missional communities. People who are in community with one another, but who are outwardly focused in the world. Now that's a lot right there, but the point is we need people who have that missional intentionality. They're not simply living within the walls of the church or living some sort of religious, narcissistic experience. And the last one was becoming entrepreneurial. Now, becoming a kingdom entrepreneur means they're self-motivated. And they seek to bring eternal kingdom life to those that are wandering, suffocating, and dying. And it starts them on the path to becoming kingdom entrepreneurs. Now, this usually looks like they start some kind of a new ministry initiative in the church. It could just be serving coffee on Sunday morning if you don't have coffee. But the point is, all of this kind of entrepreneurial behavior is teaching self-initiative, team building, innovation, compassion for others, and possibly how to cope with failure. Depends if it fails or succeeds. But failure is not necessarily bad. For a lot of people, their first failure, you know, they sort of break into a million pieces. And so that right there is a clear sign of fragility within who they are. We need a higher level of resilience than that if we're going to succeed in the ministry. But in addition to creating entrepreneurial stuff within the church itself, we need people who are entrepreneurial outwardly. So back to what I already said, we want to push them out and cause them, as part of their experience, to do something that's outwardly reaching, and preferably evangelistic. Preferably evangelistic. Strongly, preferably evangelistic. Why? Because the church today no longer really evangelizes. We talk about it, we pray about it, we sing about it, but 90% of Christians will never lead anyone to Christ in their lifetime, and 90% of those who will haven't done so in 5 years. That's a well-known statistic within kind of evangelistic studies. So we need people who are going to think about new ways to bring people, not just to church, but into relationship with Christ. They'll fail a lot at first, but they'll get better at it as they go. So we develop that. All right. I am now over time by 9 minutes, and so rather than giving this a proper ending, I'll stop, take a couple of questions, and then I think we're going to have ministry time, right? Yeah. So Given all that I said, I did all right. So, thank you. All right, again, I apologize, but now the watch is stopped. It's dead, so it isn't my fault. All right, any questions? Yeah, I'll go back, Steve.
You're touching on two things, I think the last session, that were questions for me. One was Freemasonry, and the other was allergies. I was just asking the Lord before this trip, why Australia has so many allergies, but I go to other countries and people seem to be eating fine. So you're tying them together. Could you just help us understand that? And more than just a problem, how do we solve it?
Well, the way to deal with Freemasonry is to drive out the spirits that give it power. All curses are enforced by demonic entities. And a lot of the ministry that goes on when it comes to demonic is people saying rote things and saying, okay, now we've renounced this, so it's gone, right? No, it's gone when it's gone. And when people get delivered, they really know they've been delivered. They can tell you, I felt it lift, I coughed it out, I vomited, whatever, but something happened. Freemasonry, I mean, it's its own teaching, and I have the CDs. I didn't put anything on the table, but maybe I'll do that before we wrap it up. But Freemasonry is a better dressed form of Satanism. And at its root, it's worshiping a false god named Jabulon. J-A-H for Yahweh, it's a variant spelling. B-U-L for the Canaanite god Baal or Baal, again variant spelling, and On for Anubis, the Egyptian god of war. So it's an unholy trinity, and with it, Satan arrogates worship to himself that belongs to God. It's very consistent with what we see in Ezekiel 28. So, when people get involved in Freemasonry, they pledge over all of their descendants in perpetuity to the service of Jabulon. It's a blood oath. And so people who are born into families that are Freemasonic, you can't just get out of it because you choose not to go to the lodge. You're still already given over, and the entities that control those demonic curses come around to collect the toll because they think they have a right to the individual. And this can go on for generations. This idea that, it's only to the third and fourth generation, that's just poor exegesis and lack of knowledge of the way it really works. So we drive out the Freemasonic spirits, and one of the problems that you see, first of all, Freemasonry is rampant in this country. It's rampant in Scotland too, because Scottish Rite Freemasonry, hello. It's also rampant among British people because it migrated out of Scotland into England. And it seems to be pretty prevalent in most of the northern European countries as well, France, Germany, and so forth, Italy, Spain, whatever. So, when you're dealing with Freemasonry, the problem at its root is that this person is pledged to another god, but they are supposed to be serving our God, whom we call Father. And because of that, they're in violation of the first commandment, which says, you will have no other gods beside me. And because of that, one of the penalties that comes with that particular issue, per Deuteronomy 28 and 31, is that oftentimes people's digestion ends up with some sort of a curse on it. And the spirits of infirmity and death love to travel with Jabulon, so we usually take all three of them out at once. Usually where one of them is present, all of them are present. That it's not true in the reverse order. Sometimes people have spirits of death and infirmity, but they don't have Jabulon because they're not coming from Freemason families. But if they have Jabulon, you can pretty well count that they've got death and infirmity. So, people have all these stomach conditions and disorders, and it's exploded in Australia just in the time I've been here. And we're starting to have it in the United States as well. In the United States, we have Freemasonry, not as much of it, but we have enough of it. But the other issue that we have in the United States is we've got a lot more, I would say, variant religions, maybe even than you have. And this isn't just true of Freemasonry, it's true of any foreign religion. So people are experimenting, they're being open-minded and ecumenical. And when I say ecumenical, I don't mean among Christian denominations, I mean religion to religion. Because each religion has its own, God or system of gods that it serves. So now we're talking about different gods altogether, not the various flavors of particular faith. So, much of the digestive disorder that you run into, sometimes breathing disorders, and to a lesser extent, the brain disorders that you run into will be rooted in Freemasonry. And so if you ask people, strange that you have this system of problems, do you have Freemasons in your family? Oh yeah, my great-grandpa was a founder of the Masonic Lodge in Blackpool. Well, good to know. Right there, that becomes a primary place to begin the ministry. Now, could there be more? Right, yeah, sure. But might as well start with what you know is there and work outward from that point. That's probably as simple as I can say it without having to get too long. John, I thought you were raising your hand.
Just a quick question. This is a sovereign grace question. I
Okay.
have two sons in ministry. None of them were mentored, but the sovereign grace was predestined in their life. And this is where I think we've missed out, because so many people have written Romans 8 out of the Bible because they don't like predestination. But I'm a predestinarian. I believe in the sovereign grace of God, and that He touches certain people, and they can do nothing about it but fulfill the purposes of God in their life. My two sons are examples of them, great preachers and great leaders, but I don't say that with any pride, it's just with thanksgiving. But the thing is that I believe that we've got to be vigilant in our identification of sovereign grace in people. And I know two grandsons of mine are going to be ministers. And that's an insight that I think we've got to pray so that we can pick the sovereign grace that is within people and affirm it. My son has written a book called My Old Man's Mentor. I didn't know he was God or whatever his mentor. But the point is, what I'm saying, Ken, is we can't take away anything from the power of sovereign grace within the lives of many ministers and many leaders within the life of the church, because they can't get out of it. It's inescapable. And once God has placed His hand of mercy of predestination on a person, they better watch out, or else they'll be very unhappy people.
Is that a comment or a question? I'm not sure how I'm supposed to respond.
I'm expressing a viewpoint.
Okay.
Observation.
Yeah.
I'm expressing a viewpoint that I believe is fundamental to anything we've got to do with the extension of ministry, is to spot the sovereign grace and approve it and affirm it in order that we can build often in the area of the kingdom of God and the purposes that He's got for either our children or our friends. So I'm saying, where does sovereign grace come into the whole thing?
Well, there's no question God calls people. He called Moses against his will.
That's right.
He called Jeremiah against his will. He called Amos against his will. Jesus summoned Peter and Andrew and James and John. So there's no denying that the Lord calls people to ministry, but that's not really the focus of what I was talking about. I was making the assumption that we have people who are called to, well, first let's make a distinction. Some will be called to be Reverend McElroy. Other people will be called to be leaders in the church, and the hand of the Lord is on them, but they'll never wear the title of Reverend because they're intended to stay in the world in whatever role they have, and they will serve in the church. But that's still a calling. That's why Paul, when he writes to the Ephesians, he says, to those who are called in Christ. He's not just writing to the pastor of the church at Ephesus, he's writing to all of them. So, calling can occur both at that level of being a congregational leader or denominational leader. It can occur in the sense of somebody who's a leader within the congregation. But what I was really talking about was, now that we've got somebody who has the call of God on their life, how do we refine and develop them so that they will be all that they can be and not somehow, achieve 80% or 50% or 40% of what they might have otherwise achieved if they'd been subject to good mentoring and development.
Well, I'm not arguing with you.
Yeah.
That's just my own.
Yeah.
But I am saying that we've got to place more dependence upon sovereign grace within the lives of people than perhaps we've given credit for. And I can only say that in my experience, sovereign grace has got to come up on the priority list of our recognition and our awareness. Because without us realising the powers of God's sovereign grace within our lives and within the lives of others, we're lost. That's the beginning point from my point of view. And predestination is very much a cause of that. It's a no-no and furphy to many people today. They don't think God can do that. But God can. God is a sovereign God.
Mm-hmm.
And that's all I'm saying.
Fair enough.
I'm sorry about that.
No, that's all right. Right there.
Yeah, you talked about the importance of having a Timothy and sort of being able to identify someone who can take your role down the track. Would you say that's something that God picks and then we got to find God who is this person, or is it we pick sort of somebody?
Yes. Sometimes people will seek you out and they will want to be, mentored or led by you. And at times that might even feel awkward. You might not know what to do with that. Other times the Lord will point someone out to you and say, I really want you to take this person under wing and develop them. And sometimes you'll just be in the course of normal life, whether it's you're in a Bible study together, or you meet at church, or you go on a retreat together or something, you meet someone and you just kind of click. And you start hanging around together, and pretty soon it's one of those. So I think there's several ways it can develop. But, after a while it becomes fairly obvious that this person is traveling with you. And I don't mean literally traveling, they might be traveling. I travel, and oftentimes the people that are my mentees travel with me. But if you don't have an itinerant ministry, the word traveling is more in the Aussie sense of the word, how you traveling. So they're doing life with you. And in that, they are growing to hopefully a better state of maturity, because you're keeping an eye out of them, speaking things into their life that need to be spoken. Other questions?
I might just segue us into ministry.
Yep. Okay.
Would you stay up here? Robert had a word of knowledge. He said, do you want to just give that very